Hello and welcome. These days, we're faced with a paradox. On the one hand, we're living through an era in which the need for joint international action is being felt in particularly urgent ways. On the other hand, the global direction of travel seems to point away from internationalism. We are seemingly faced with a revival of national borders, both physical and mental ones. As I'd like to argue in this short video, the study of past internationalisms is highly relevant in this context. And there are two major ways in which it can help us make sense of the world today. Firstly, it puts matters into perspective, as it highlights that seemingly contradictory impulses also coexisted in earlier time periods. And secondly, the study of internationalism raises wider questions about agency in the international arena. So let me move on to my first point. While our present might seem paradoxical, so was the past. After all, the very term internationalism arose in a period that was also an age of nationalism, and the entwined nature of these two phenomena is well known. Moreover, one could push this point further and argue that it was in times of intense nationalism that internationalism received fresh stimuli. Think, for instance, of an event such as the Women's Peace Congress at The Hague, held in 1915. Taking place at a time of violent antagonisms, it was a manifestation of internationalism based on visions of peace and sisterhood. Indeed, it comes as no surprise that many recent works on the history of internationalism have focused on the interwar period, revealing how transnational exchanges and global visions coexisted with aggressive nationalisms and deglobalization. Such observations raise wider questions about historical contingency. Supporters of internationalism were prone to developing their own teleological narratives. See, for instance, the following point made by the Brussels-based Union of International Associations in 1914. The UIA wrote, quote, "The organization of the world is due to a vast and continuous movement which has lately acquired an immense impetus. It tends to stimulate more cooperation among similar groups in all countries, ensures a greater acquisition of knowledge and of technical expertise throughout the world, promotes the unification of methods and international agreements on all subjects wherever possible and desirable." End of quote. Clearly, the subsequent turn of events revealed that the world had not been undergoing a purposeful development towards closer integration and harmony. But as historians, we're used to this messiness. It's the messiness of historical change, and this perhaps allows for a more realistic appraisal of the current situation. Clearly, some of the teleological visions of globalization that people articulated in the 1990s and early 2000s are currently being put into question. But transnational cooperation has certainly not ground to a halt. And this takes me to my second point, which concerns agency in the international realm. The study of past internationalisms has underlined that the international sphere is not only shaped by diplomats and political leaders. Instead, it has drawn attention to the multitude of actors on the international scene, from experts to activists. In this respect, the study of internationalism highlights the role of people who were in some ways being marginalized in both domestic and international settings. Think, for instance, of the history of socialist and communist internationalisms. In 1905, the French socialist Jean Jaurès argued that international life was based on, quote, "a community of profound sympathy between workers of all countries, who, as he put it, were experiencing the same suffering," end of quote. The transnational challenge to different forms of marginalization and oppression was also intrinsic to the feminist, anti-imperialist, and Pan-African varieties of internationalism. In many cases, such internationalisms were clearly at odds with forms of internationalism that sought to consolidate rather than transform the international order. All of this is relevant today. After all, we also live in an era in which particular political movements are built upon transnational visions and exchanges, from the school strikes for climate to Black Lives Matter. As historians, we can be conscious that some forms of internationalism had a radical potential, while others certainly had their blind spots. And I look forward to discussing such questions further with the other participants of this workshop. Thank you.